Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another night of What the Church Could Be. Pastor Wes here to bring you another life-changing word. If it's your first time checking us out, welcome to our church. Now, tonight's a little different. It's not like your traditional Bible study. The name says it all, What the Church Could Be. We go about 25, 30 minutes is what we do, and we challenge our ideas about God. That's really important because as human beings, we're flawed, and sometimes we get some really off ideas about God. Church world is a blessing, but it also can be very problematic. And Nicole and I, my wife, who co-pastors church with me, we believe in the power of church, but we also know church is off in some areas. And to be our best in what we want to see church world become and us become as Christians, we've got to let go of some old things that sometimes violate the very love of God, that violate the best interest of humanity, and that bring us to a selfish place, in a selfish version of God, in an ego-driven version of God. And we want to distance ourselves and shed off, and not distance ourselves from people. We're talking about the ideas here is what we want to let go and move forward. So that's what we're here to do. Thanks for jumping on. Those who are tuning in from the church that comes in every week, man, guys, share this, spread the message, let people know about Thursday nights. I think we're in a good place with this thing, and I think we've been growing, and it's so awesome to connect with you guys so much each and every time. And remember, throw up the scriptures. I appreciate that each and every week, so people can follow, even people watching this later. So let's pray and get right into this. Got my notes right? Let's go. Heavenly Father, we come before you once again tonight, and we just thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your love that's going to be expressed in this time. We thank you we're going to see you more clearly than ever, and we open ourselves to experience what the Spirit of God needs to minister us. Father, I admit I need you to order my steps, articulate my words. May everything be strategic and ordered by your Spirit, not just an outline or script or making a point. May it all come across in love and bring glory. May it be an on-time word that blesses your people and brings them hope in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we picked up on this series talking about the wrong emphasis. And this is part two, if you want to give it a part. It's just a long continuing message. And we hung out Matthew 15, 1 through 20. And we're going to read that again. This week we talked about, though, how can I tell I'm putting the wrong emphasis, is what we talked about. The wrong emphasis, typically, for example, we tend to put the emphasis on everything's about how we treat God and honor God. But yet Jesus showed us to honor God and treat God means to treat people right. And most of the church world is lost into, heaven and hell, blessing and cursing. Where am I standing with God? Have I dealt with sin? Have I done this? Have I done that? All because I need to make sure I get to the good place and experience a better life. And I better make sure I got my stuff together between me and God. And we stay consumed with that. And that's the wrong emphasis. Instead of realizing, I want to live a life just because I simply want to, of being a little less selfish. And I want to treat people with dignity and respect no matter who they are. If they're just a human being, period. Let me be respectful and treat you with dignity, equality, and love. An unconditional version of that. And let me focus on leaving this earth better than I found it. That's all I want to do. I want to leave. One of the biggest things, my prayer before God, God, may I leave this world better than I found it. That's my focus now. So we got into this passage. So let's get into Matthew 15, 1 through 20. I'm going to reread it again from the Message just to get us all on the same page here. It says in verse 1, after that, Pharisees and religious scholars came to Jesus all the way from Jerusalem criticizing, why do your disciples play fast and loose with the rules? Now, other translations will say that is where they're talking about the washing of hands that's been handed down from our ancestors. But Jesus put it right back on them. Why do you use your rules to play fast and loose with God's commands, referring to the 10 Commandments, what he's talking about here? God clearly says, respect your father and mother, and anyone denouncing father or mother should be killed. Now, I'll emphasize, they added the part about being killed for that. Listen, you should want to honor your father and mother, but God, who is gracious and loving and mercy, is not going to kill you over that. If we gave this analogy last week, if you think that your teenager who is dishonoring and disrespecting the parents and going through a bad phase in life should be put to death for it, you have something broken in you, and it's called dead religion. you should not have that concept of God. So re-emphasizing that, because Jesus went around with mercy everywhere. We know that. So what is he doing? He's quoting back their rules that they put and saying, you don't even follow your own rules. Not that I even agree with your rules, but you don't even follow your own system. Picking it right here. But you weasel around that by saying, whoever wants to can say to father and mother, what I owe to you, I have given to God. That can hardly be called respecting a parent. You cancel God's commands by your rules. Frauds. Isaiah prophecy of you hit the bullseye. These people make a big show, quoting the prophecy now. These people make a big show of saying the right thing, but their heart isn't in it. They act like they're worshiping me, but they don't mean it. They just use me as a cover for teaching whatever suits their fancy. And there's two sides of that. There's the exploitive side where people do this for corrupt reasons. And gosh, I hate that every time I see it. And we all have to guard our hearts from that. But the other side of it is that we all are subject to, and we all have at some point participated in, is when you're treating someone right because you're under the conviction of, if I don't treat them with love, I might get cursed later. If I don't give, the windows of heaven won't be open. If I don't say my confessions, maybe God won't keep me out of that car wreck. So I'm going to do it only for those. Your heart's not in that. How can my kids have a life of love for me if everything I give them is fear-driven? And if you don't do it, punishment's always going to happen. There's no room for the heart to give freely from a place of love. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have rules and there isn't consequences. Life is all about that. Don't get me wrong. But I am saying it when it comes to between us and God. God is bigger than that. God is able to reach across that. That system and operate with us differently. That's what makes him so amazingly big and so much God, where he can love beyond our failures, beyond our mistakes, beyond the do this or this is bad thing's going to happen. So that's also what he's talking about here. Verse 10, he then called the crowd together and said, listen, and take this to heart. It's not that what you swallow that pollutes your life. It's not what you eat, but what you vomit up. Later, his disciples came and told him, did you know how you upset the Pharisees when they heard what you said? Let me say that again. Did you know how upset the Pharisees were when they heard what you said? He's like, are you worried about them? They were ticked off, man. Jesus shrugged it off. Every tree that was planted by my Father in heaven will be pulled up by its roots. Forget them. What is he talking about there, though? This is not the weaponized version of God's going to get them. It's saying every revelation, every idea, every concept of God that was not planted by my Father, sown in by the Spirit and the revelation, is eventually going to fail. That's what it's actually meaning. It's talking about the understanding. They are blind men leading blind men. When a blind man leads the blind man, they both end up in the ditch. And that was actually, people think that's criticism, but it was actually a lot of compassion that was shown there. Jesus was saying, hey, they're blind. They're not evil. Realize he didn't call them evil. He didn't call them these people are going to hell or nothing. He's like, they're just blinded, unfortunately. And that's been me. That's been all of us. All of us have been this person and still have blind spots. I have blind spots. And I'm allowing God, and that's what tonight's all about, to remove the blind spots in me so I can see God more clear and clear as love. Peter said, I don't get it. Put it in plain language. Jesus replied, you too? Are you being willfully stupid? He's like, Peter, you get it. But what was Peter struggling with? The fear. You see this all through Peter's the writings and accounts with Peter, all through the New Testament, is Peter struggled with the perception of people and being ostracized and here's the other thing. It didn't end well for these guys. These guys were all martyred, including Peter. So there was a legit fear. I mean, you saw how Saul of Tarsus was before he became Paul. And had that interaction road to Damascus. He literally murdered Stephen. And he thought he was doing it for God. So Peter, knowing the zealot nature, he was like, these guys could turn around and kill us all. And they even killed Jesus, put him on the cross. for the very thing Peter was worried about. So you have to understand there's a lot of fear. We all deal with that. There's things, I talked about this last week, where I'm struggling with trying to say certain things. I know God is true. I see it, but there is a lot of potential backlash that comes from it. Church world backlash, financial violence. People just leave and stop giving, or people like, man, we inviting you ever in church. Not that I get any of those invites, but nonetheless, it can cause a lot of backlash towards me. There's backlash towards my family, when these things come out. And thankfully, it's pretty minimal, and thankfully it's not really in our church, gratefully. But there is some hesitation sometimes. And then there's the side of it, oh my God, what happens if I step out there and say that? Is this going to mess somebody's life up? And that's always a thing on my head. Even like on Thursday night, it took me a while to kind of get to this comfortability of Thursday night to do this, because I'm like, am I going to just blow it all up and mess people up more than I help them? But let me keep moving along here. So I'm saying all that just to relate to Peter is what we're doing here. Jesus replied, verse 16 here, "You too, are you being willfully stupid? Don't you know that anything that is swallowed works its way through the intestines and is finally defecated?" That's all it does. But what comes out of the mouth gets its start in the heart. It is from the heart that we vomit up our evil arguments, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, lies, and cussing. That's what pollutes us. Eating or not eating certain foods, washing or not washing our hands, that's neither here nor there. Now, when it talks about pollute us, he's using terminology that doesn't always catch us the same way, because you're like, well, pollute us. If I eat a bunch of junk food, the doctor's going to tell me it pollutes me. It breaks down my body. Absolutely, that's true. And not washing your hands. Hello, please wash your hands. That's nasty. Reducing germs. He's not talking about that. What he's talking about, when they say unclean, they're talking about, I am not righteous with God. I think that's the only way we can relate it to our vernacular and our vocabulary we use in church world. I'm unrighteous. I have unright standing with God. That's what he's talking about. So if I don't wash my hands, now I am out of sorts between God and I. If I eat this certain food, I may get cursed by God. I may be unrighteous. I may be unclean before God. Everything was about staying clean before God so they would stay blessed. That's why he was using these analogies. He's like, listen, you not washing your hand and eating food has nothing to do with you being unclean before God. It can't affect your health. You should do it for a health reason, but you shouldn't do it because you think God is going to be off put with you, or that you're going to be unrighteous before God. And see that, when you understand that, now all of a sudden you start examining church world. You start examining all your behavior. Are you doing this because you might feel you be unclean before God, or is this what makes you clean before God? If you're entertaining any of that with anything, you have put the wrong emphasis. See, and people can't, when people hear that, and this is the problem with church, this is a big problem with our thinking and our concept of God. People think, well, people are just going to sin. Well, then why are you here? Has God not touched your heart enough that you don't want to do certain things in life? And I don't refrain from doing acts of sin, quote unquote, because I'm going to get blessed or cursed. I do it because I just want to be a better person. And not better than anyone, because I'm not, by the way. I don't want to get lost. Well, I'm more superior than you because I genuinely just want to live the best life for God. That's garbage too. That you're the worst of the worst. You're the most self-righteous. I do it because I want to be the best version of myself for my wife. I want to be the best version of myself for my kids. I want to be the best version of myself for my church, my friends, my community. And I want to leave the world a little better than I found it. That's my motivation. None of it has anything to do with God blessing or cursing me, though. God is just good, and I accept that as the truth unveiled in Jesus. And so I abandon all energy and effort and all emphasis on trying to appease God, and I live a life devoted to serve because I want to. That's where we get to this place, man. It's such a liberating place to live. Now, how can I tell? We talked about, we covered these 5 things. How can I tell I'm putting the wrong emphasis on? Let's go to number 1. We ignore our God-given intellect. Sometimes I can look at something and just logically say, that ain't God. We ignore our God-given intellect. There are certain things beyond any doubt has nothing to do with God, whether it be a wise decision or not. When you look at certain things like, God doesn't really care about that. Why do people get so upset about that? Like, oh, I watched Harry Potter, because in our house, every summer Jeremiah and I will do a Harry Potter marathon. And I remember growing up, people were like, you can't be around witches and wizards and everything else. Dude, it's just a fantasy kids movie. It has nothing to do. Oh, and somebody's probably getting upset about that right now. But I know my God-given common sense, you're not going to rob me out of that. Has nothing to do with anything. It's just an entertaining movie is all it is. I don't give it that power in my life. If that can shake your faith that bad, I don't know what kind of faith you got, but it ain't real faith. That was probably a little shady, so I apologize. But, I've never seen the most faith-filled people be the most scared people of everything in life. We're scared of ungodly music. We're scared of movies. We're scared of this. We're scared of that. You are scared. Like, if everything around you can corrupt you that easily, what good is your faith? But that's what happens when we put the wrong emphasis on things. We walk around paranoid. So we don't want to abandon our God-given intellect where you look at certain things and it's like, darn well it has zero to do with God. Don't ignore that. Because if you are, that's where you can tell you're putting the wrong emphasis on stuff. Number 2, you'll realize you have hypocrisy or you're cherry picking. We all do this, by the way. The first person that says they don't do this is probably the worst in bondage to this. You'll recognize the hypocrisy. Let's go back to the movies thing. You'll be sitting there banning every rated R movie you could ever think of, but then you'll be over there listening to every kind of music you could think of. Because you're like, God don't really care about that music. But man, those movies, man, they'll get you, man. There's some hypocrisy in that. That's why, we get so outraged in our politics, because there's so much hypocrisy. And especially church world. One of the biggest hypocrisies in church world is abortion. You can tell that because you'll go hard in the paint for abortion, but then you won't do anything else for the child. And you can tell the selectiveness where, you're all of a sudden you're emphasizing this big expression of human life and valuing human life, but yet you can come to a different level, like say, and unfortunately these are politicized points. So you're going to think, well, you're talking about Republicans or Democrats or none of that. I'm just talking about humanity. We get mad because we want to be pro-life, but we can be so anti-education with church. I come from a world that was very anti-education of the world. To be a true Christian, you got to hate the world's education. And it's like, okay, you're not going to be able to read or write or get beyond doing math by counting your fingers and toes. You just call us dumb? No, but you could be borderline. But that's where we get lost in the institution semantics. You have to realize church sold us all that stuff because they got their own business. Church is a business in itself. Now, in our world, Nicole and I strive to be a church, then a business, not a business, then a church. A church that has to do business. Why is that important? Because there needs to be integrity with the money. You need to be in compliance with state and federal laws. You need to make sure you operate with integrity in your business. So you will always have to be a physical entity business. And if you will operate in integrity to serve the people, you are a business and you need to be aware of that. But we're a church first, then a business. But a lot of people are a business that does church. And that's where we do get into the thing where anything that would threaten the business. Why do you think we have such a problem with movies? Because we want to get our movies out there that we can make money off of. Why do you think we have a problem with music? because we want to get our music out there so we can make money off of it. And people tell me, and some of it, there's two sides of it. The institution demands that. Some of it is because we think all this stuff is sin. That's one side of it. But there still is the business side of it. Well, man, you should come to church for healing and never see a doctor. Well, that's because you'll give money to the church instead of the doctor. Follow the money. A lot of it makes sense. And you'll realize how much it isn't about sin. And you'll see the hypocrisy. Now, all churches aren't doing that. We don't do that here. We definitely don't do that here. So don't come around here saying it. I have been more than enough adamant being like, go to the doctor. I don't care if you listen to whatever music or anything. I'm not going to say that. How you treat people is what I'm challenging people with. So we can talk about the hypocrisy or cherry picking. And people can do that with scriptures all the time. You cherry pick with the scriptures when you do that. And you can tell how you can tell sometimes how you're emphasizing. Like, for example, Jesus gave this statement, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. If your hand offends you, cut it off. Well, nobody in the name of Jesus has followed through on that. At least they shouldn't have. Because most of us look at that's crazy and that's not what Jesus meant. And so we can recognize it in certain areas, but in some areas we go hard in the paint on some scriptures that are just like, listen, it doesn't really mean all that. It just means simply wash your hands. It's just something healthy to do. It has nothing to do with anything your relationship with God. And we have to examine that and realize when we get caught in hypocrisy. Number 3, and if you get caught in anything, don't feel bad. Don't beat yourself up. Just change. I get caught in these. I find myself getting upset about certain stuff that I'm like offended by. And I'm like, why is that offending me so much? But this doesn't at all. I'll ask myself things like that. Why does that area of quote unquote supposable sin upset me so much, but this one doesn't? And I'll find my hypocrisy. And you know what I do? I change. That's as simple as it is. Number 3, you'll find yourself going through the emotions, I almost put there. Actually, you'll find yourself going through the motions while ignoring the inward knowing. What do I mean? You'll go through the rituals. You'll go through the usual church grind. Man, this is what we do. We go to church to go to church. We give to give. We did, but there's no heart in it. There's no you. What I mean by the inward knowing, I am inspired by God to take action versus I am doing this because this is just what I'm supposed to do. Now, there is some times where it's like, I have no inspiration. I don't know what to do. And sometimes you just get up and you know, hey, I need to do my confessions today because I don't feel like it. But you know why you're doing it. You're doing it because, you know what? I've gotten stuck in self and I need to do something even though I don't feel inspired or feel like to get out of selfishness, which will reactivate that inspiration and get my mind off self. There's a place for that. I'm not talking about that. But you know how you just get going through the motion? You could be doing all the religious motions. I've seen people, you can be twirling and everything else up on the front of the sanctuary, every praise and worship, and you're just going through the motions because you're not doing the inward work. You're ignoring the inward voice that is telling you, hey, you need to be a little nicer. Well, I'm just doing what God expressed. No, you just about took out that person's eye with your flag. You being a little shady, Pastor? No, I'm being a little direct about some stuff. Where I've seen that. Are you against flags and twirling and all that stuff? No, you hurting other people. That's what we are. Because you can do both. So we just get going through the motions, though. I gave the communion example. I think it was tonight or even last week. Some of my examples are running redundant here, but you guys got the point. Going through the emotions while ignoring the inward knowing. Man, my job is to follow that inward knowing. Number 4, the fear of letting go of tradition. Oh man, that's where Peter was struggling. You can tell there is a fear that rises up of letting go of the tradition. And typically it's around hell, going to hell, or experiencing the curse, or people, so you're afraid of going to hell. You're afraid of getting cursed instead of blessed. You're afraid of what people will turn on you. And some of these, the people one can be very real. I'm not trying to mince words about that and just diminish the factor that could happen. Or sometimes we hide in our tradition so we don't have to face our own brokenness. We can hide in our traditions so we don't have to face our own brokenness. That's an important one. That's sometimes why we're afraid of letting go of our traditions that are destroying our lives, by the way. And do you not think the grace of God is enough that if you let go of a tradition, and let's say you're wrong about it, that God's grace isn't enough to keep you from experiencing hell and the curse? Is that it? No. God is merciful, God is gracious, and you have to understand, like I used to be so afraid of missing it, that all of a sudden God's going to maybe send me to hell or curse me. Dude, if God is that petty, if I have no room for margin for error, when I'm striving for God, by the way, I'm letting go of a tradition because I'm trying to strive for the bigness of God and how much God loves. You think God's going to punish for that? Your concept of God can be very broken. That's a messed up tradition in itself. But realize God's merciful. Realize that is. And then with people, it's tough. There's no other way to put it. With people, some people are going to turn on you. But you know what? Every time you lose a community, if you do, one, it's never as many people as you think. It's normally the 1 out of every 10 that hurts, and it's the one you remember the most. But even if you do, there's a new community that will embrace you. And you'll go through highs and lows of that sometimes. And you'll get better at navigating it, is what I'll say, and just being full of the Spirit. But I'm not going to make it light that's not easy. But then the other one, our own brokenness. Got to be willing to face our own brokenness. We can't use our traditions to hide in the brokenness that makes us sick. So we want to do that. That's how you can realize you're putting the wrong emphasis on things, though. That'll keep you locked into it. Number 5, and we'll close here. This is the last one anyways. When religious piety comes over the harm and suffering of others. Jesus gave this example in Matthew 15 with the parents. Imagine your parents, they're old. They're in their older years and they're not able to keep rent or the lights on, and they're not able to work anymore. And you say, well, I need to go put my tithe at the church instead of paying their light bill. So sorry, mom and dad, I got to go pay this tithe and I can't pay. And they're sitting there in the dark. That's what tradition does. So now, because you're honoring God, you're ignoring their suffering and their harm that may come to them. Because now they're sitting in the dark. They're older. They may not get around as much and trip and fall and get hurt and break something. You know, that's what religion will get you lost into. Religious piety. You know, it amazes me how much preachers are so angry about the LGBTQ plus community but cannot deal with the pedophiles in their church. That is disgusting. How we destroy a minister of LGBTQ+, but yet we'll invite a racist every time, and every time he says everything's shy of the N-word on our pulpit, what's our response? Give him an offering. How we bring in preachers that disrespect my spiritual mom because they're a sexist and say sexist stuff all over the pulpit, and what do? We praise them and we give them an offering and invite them back next year. I'm sorry, I can't do that stuff anymore. I'm sorry, I know better. And here's the thing, I have my own blind spots. Like, I don't get up before you on this pulpit perfect, but the difference is I can acknowledge that. Where how it is, we honor and reverence the man of God, religious piety, but ignore the harm and suffering of others. Because here's the other thing, if you ask me which one is the worst, the racist and the sexist is worst. Because like Jesus was talking about here, every one of those things he listed at the end. Let me go back at the end here. He listed out what comes up from your heart: evil arguments, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, lies, and cussing. What is all that? You harming someone else. You harming someone else. See, being a racist, you are harming other people. Being a sexist, you are harming other people. And you go around this world injuring others. See, but we don't like talking about that in a pulpit because partners will stop giving. Let me get off that. That's it. But that last one's I'm so passionate about because I've also made a lot of mistakes in these areas. I have not got it all perfect. And I'm not mad at anyone. I'm more mad at the fact that people that are suffering get ignored and passed over and over again. And we sit idly by and don't do anything about it because we're lost to religious piety instead of what we know inwardly. We know the God-given common sense that tells us that's not right and we need to do something about it. So that's how you kind of recognize, though. There's the end of it. I hope I didn't end on a low note, but how you're putting the wrong emphasis on things. Next week, though, we'll get into this other part. Let me just check my notes real quick. We'll talk about the 7 different ways where, what are some big areas, religious areas that we get focused on, superstitions that rob us of experiencing God's best. So I hope tonight's message bless you. Nicole and I, as always, send our love, send our prayers with you, just send our blessings. Man, may God keep you as he always does and keep you in favor, love, experiencing the best, because that's what God does best. So I just pray nothing but goodness over your life. All right, guys. Hope to catch you Saturday at virtual service. I hope you see you at our in-person service. We'll be back here next week. Love you all. Have a great night.